the manner in which they're going about this does reveal their weakness. It's just that they have to resort to brute force because they are losing the battle online. We're seeing that, especially with the younger generation. We're talking about the younger generation again. Really everybody under 50. Really they are losing that battle, and I don't think this is going to win it for them.
No, it's going to make it worse.
Yeah,
The writing is on the wall. And the last podcast we did was quite depressing, talking about just how terrible everything was in Gaza.
yeah,
But what's happened is so horrific in Gaza, and the world is seeing it and waking up to it. And the fact that you have these Zionist groups in the United States that clearly have all are holding on to all the levers of power in the United States, and they're beginning to pull them.
right.
It's people can see it now. People can say, you can't criticize Israel in any way. We will punish you, and then it's going to backfire. So I think what we are seeing is it's the beginning of the end of Zionism. I don't see them turning this around at all. I don't see how Israel can survive after this.
No, I agree. I think they're losing the intellectual argument, the moral argument. What they have is military force, and they have, like you say, their hands on the levers of power. And, they can maintain their power that way for a time. But I think it's, that time is limited. That time is running out. I was thinking also another hypocrisy is, again, on the right, we're supposed to be about sovereignty. Again, make America great again. I think you could make an argument. Again, it's like these people, this foreign student or maybe this immigration applicant. We don't want this because this person or these people because they're against core American values. Well, what is it? Support for Israel is supposed to be a core American value, apparently. But, how is this about American sovereignty? It isn't. This is actually, you could very, I think, reasonably make the argument that these deportations and this defunding, this is all done actually really for Israel, for Netanyahu even. There are Israelis that are uncomfortable with this. In general, the left is. We're talking about kind of imposing the will of a right-wing Israeli government. How is this making America great again? How is this about American sovereignty? How is this a core American value? And again, I think it's just, some people will never see the hypocrisy of it, but I think especially the younger generation is seeing it. And so, yeah, these moves are just going to contribute to that awareness among them.
Right. Well, it's very frustrating because if you're concerned about anti-Semitism, nobody in the government, nobody in power or in the media is addressing the root cause of the rise in anti-Semitism. No one's addressing the fact that it's directly tied to what's happening in Gaza and what's happening to the Palestinians. They're suffering. It's right there. And that refusal to acknowledge that is just going to turn more and more people against Israel and against Zionism because
right.
it's silly.
Right, which isn't necessarily anti-Semitic. It's kind of but yeah, you're absolutely right. If you're Jewish and you're afraid, that you might become a victim group once again, you ought to be fighting tooth and nail, against the policies of the Israeli government. And of course, there are quite a few Jews that are doing that. People like Max Blumenthal, who are the fiercest critics of Zionism right now.
Okay, so I think we're in agreement that Zionism is dying. The Israeli state will most likely not survive I don't know, I don't want to give a timeline, but it won't survive. But what will that mean when it goes down? How will the United States, will we be like liberated? Will we feel like, oh my goodness, like or will it tear the country apart?
Yeah, I don't know, because again, those people that support Zionism, they're powerful and they're passionate too. This is not something like in some cases you have, let's say, an establishment that's kind of that has been running on fumes for a long time. It's there. Um, well, because it was always there, but the passion from it is gone. I think you can say that was true of the Soviet Union at the end, and so it was just when it was challenged, when some minor reforms were initiated, the whole thing just came crashing down because it turned out that it was just it didn't really have any life left in it. But Zionism does have a lot of life left in it. Unfortunately, it is. There are many people that are passionately attached to it, and many of those people are very, very powerful. Now we have, passionate people on the other side, and they're growing in number. So I don't know. I certainly hope for and pray for a peaceful revolution of some kind. But uh, I don't know. It's not going to be easy. It's going to, and when it happens, it'll be a major earthquake that really, just changes the American landscape. So many of the things that we're talking about, we see the whole world changing, these great tectonic shifts that are taking place as a multipolar world arises, and the old, unipolar world, begins to fall. That's what we're witnessing on the when we look at the world stage. But within the U.S., we have this great really battle between Zionism and its opponents, and that is, it's not entirely a domestic struggle because it's obviously linked to what's happening overseas. Especially very, very much so in the Middle East. Um, but this is a struggle. Russia is a long, long ways away, and though the conflict there in Ukraine is certainly going to have an impact, and in the end, it could have a very, very large impact. Like on the dollar and a lot of other things that we've talked about. But it's not going to be felt so directly and it's not so much a part of our identity. Let's just put it that way, because I was just criticizing the idea, of course, that you're making support for Zionism a core American value, but for a lot of people it is, and that they would say that. It seems like an extraordinary claim, but they would actually openly embrace what I just said. Oh yes, this is a core American value. So you often see, Israeli flags and American flags together, and when that identity is challenged, and it is, that identity again is very, very, is not something out on the fringes, but is at the center of power. That's challenged. This is going to be something that really rips America apart. I hope that it's going to be an earthquake within America that you could say is kind of like that echoes or is the equivalent of the greater geopolitical earthquake. And I don't know. I find it very hard to predict how it's going to happen. Right now, it's hard to imagine America without, this intense devotion to Israel, because it's just so much a part of everything so much a part of the establishment, but not just the establishment. As we said, like here we are in the South, you do see Israeli flags around. They're in churches and on, bumper stickers. And
Mhm.
I really, all I can say is it's going to be huge. And I think it's inevitable, just because of the trends that we're observing now. But I don't know how it's going to play out.
Are there any historical parallels we could draw from, or is this truly a unique relationship?
No, I think a lot of people have pointed out this is unique. You can't really, it's hard to find, including Mearsheimer, who's, wrote with Stephen Walt, the book, the Israel Lobby. This is unique. It's hard to find that a great power like the U.S. really subordinated its interests, to a very minor power. Israel is a very small country. I don't think it's ever happened before. He couldn't think of any example of that, and I can't either.
So it's truly uncharted territory.
Yeah, right.
It's
Yeah, it would
interesting.
be nice if you could find something, in the past. Okay, there was, this great empire, and there's that subordinated its interest to this small state, on the other side of the ocean. Uh, but no, I don't think we can find that anywhere else.
It's amazing how that ever happened, how we
Yeah,
allowed that to happen. It's
yeah, no, it
could
is.
you
It's quite
could
amazing.
you maybe this is a tall order. Could you recap that in like 5-10 minutes for us, or is that too much
Well,
to?
and maybe it's too much, but I'll just point to a few. Um, I think a few key moments. One was Truman's decision to recognize the state of Israel. He had actually had a lot of advisors who urged him not to, but he did it for domestic political reasons. It was the Jewish vote and Jewish money, and he admitted to it. That's why he did it. Okay, that was one thing. But then, at that time, when you're talking about the late 40s, the 50s, and the early 60s, you couldn't say that the U.S. was subordinate to Israel. Um, the in those years, America understood it was the greatest power, on the planet, and it actually behaved accordingly, including, in relation to Israel. So you had the Suez Canal crisis back, I think it was 1956. Um, it was an attempt actually to seize the Suez Canal by, Israel, allied with France and England, the UK. And it involved the Levant affair, which was, a false flag operation carried out by Israel, recognized by everyone to have been a true false flag. But Eisenhower saw this happen, and he just pulled the plug on it. And he didn't, there wasn't an Israel lobby at that time. He said, this doesn't make any sense. This is wrong. You guys aren't doing this. And so the whole, the the attempt fell flat on its face. Israel had to retreat, and both France and the UK were humiliated. But I would point to the watershed moment where we really did subordinate our own interests to Israel, to the USS Liberty attack in 1967. This was at the start of the 1967 war, and that the USS Liberty came under attack by Israel. Had an American flag flying. Kept on sending it. There's no question they knew it was an American ship, and they tried very hard to sink it. But it was because of the very courageous and heroic behavior of some of the crew members that the ship was saved. They were able to get a distress signal out, and eventually got help from a nearby. I think planes flown from a nearby aircraft carrier. In fact, I actually know somebody who was on that aircraft carrier when that happened in the Mediterranean. Now the thing is, right? Well, this was Israel attacking a U.S. ship. They killed, I believe, was it 34, 37 members. A total of like 170 were injured. The ship was very nearly sunk. It could have been a lot worse. It was bad enough as it was, but it could have been a lot worse. Everybody, could have drowned on that ship. And a real nation that took put its own interests first in a proper sense. I'm not saying you have to be ultra nationalist or anything. That it has a sense of its own dignity and the concern for its own citizens would have been outraged. Our government, should have expressed that outrage and made it clear to everybody what happened. This was perfidious behavior on the behalf of by the Israeli government. But Lyndon Johnson, who was president at that time, chose to bury the whole thing. And in fact, all the surviving crew members were told not to say anything about it. But eventually they did start talking, and they have their own organization right now, and they try to educate people about it. And they sometimes do get through, they sometimes manage to reach, other fellow members of the military, but a lot of people just don't want to hear it. And in general, there's an effort, that most people are not aware of what happened. But I would point to that incident. It's like where we ceased to become, where we actually did willingly, I think this has to be pointed out. It was a choice on the part of Lyndon Johnson, and his administration to do this. He was not forced to do it. He could have, America was strong. Israel was relatively weak. I think there was already something like an Israel lobby that was growing in power, but it wasn't like it is now. He could have said no. He could have shined a light on this horrible event, but he chose not to. It was like a voluntary subservience. And that's, I think that's really where it began, where this extraordinary chapter in American history, began with the USS Liberty in 1967.